Welcome to another episode of Talking About Records. My name is G.I. Sanders from NTX Vinyl, a small independent record store just north of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. If you haven't already subscribed on YouTube or followed me on Facebook or Instagram, please do that. Really appreciate it. Today I'm going to talk about my personal favorite original 90s vinyl records. So I'm not saying these are the best. I'm not saying they're the only ones you should go after. I'm just saying they're my personal favorites. This was very difficult to whittle down to 10 records, right? I could have gone back here and chosen 50 to talk about. That would make way too long of a video, so I'll have to do this in a couple stages, I think. But for me, when I think about my favorites, it's all about, obviously, the music and the artist, whether or not I love them. But a big part of it is time and place, when these albums came out, what I remember them for, how they impacted me back in the 90s when I got most of these. And I think also how the album has aged is, as I think about now, my favorites. Obviously, there's plenty of albums that came out in the early 90s or any era from the past that you listen to, 10, 20, 30 years later, and it's like, I just don't like it quite as much. Well, for me, these have all aged incredibly well, and they are still my favorites to this day. And so that's why I wanted to kind of pick out, again, 10 records that have really impacted me, and hopefully, you can respond with some albums that have impacted you, or if these would be on your list as well. So let's kick it off. These are all original 90s pressings. The first album that came to mind the minute that I thought of this topic was The Downward Spiral by 9 Inch Nails. This is an album for me personally, in 1994 when I bought this, that was quite an eye-opener. I mean, I knew Pretty Hate Machine, I knew Broken, I'd seen it on MTV, I knew those albums. But when this hit, it was just a complete game changer. I can't really stress how impactful it was, and opened my eyes to what's possible. I had never heard anything like this. I remember the moment I walked into the record store and bought it. This is a promotional copy, which I didn't know for the longest time. This album was not even released other than promotional copies. I don't really know why. Obviously in the 90s there were not a lot of records being pressed, but of an artist's caliber like 9 Inch Nails, they were still getting pressed. And so I don't know why it didn't get an actual pressing other than the promotional copy. I'd show you the label, but it's so small you won't be able to see it. Maybe I'll put a picture up of it. But again, following Pretty Hate Machine and Broken, you didn't know what was going to come next from Trent. I definitely didn't really realize it was going to be this dark and this impactful. And I saw them on this tour, probably 3 or 4 times. I regret not making the trek to Woodstock 94 for the epic Mudstock performance. But still, when I think about this record as far as how albums that have aged well over time and have really proven to be innovative even 20, 30 years later, this is one that stands out. This has been reissued in recent years. There was a 2016 or 2018 campaign that Trent did where he put out definitive editions of this album as well as a couple of other 9 Inch Nails albums. But it's now out of press as of August 2021, so it's hard to come by again. Hopefully they'll do another run of it. I suspect they will, this being such a key album in Trent's discography. So if you're not familiar with The Downward Spiral, check it out. Try and track it down on vinyl. I can't recommend it enough. This is just, again, a groundbreaking record from a period of time where there was so much creativity coming out from all of the artists that I'm going to talk about here. But as you talk about the alternative music scene of the early to mid 90s, this was one of the peaks, in my opinion, of the entire era. And I can't recommend it enough. So that's my first one, The Downward Spiral by 9 Inch Nails. This one, Mother Love Bone's Apple. This is an iconic album for a number of reasons. I love the music on it. It's got a number of tracks which I will call out. First and foremost is Chloe Dancer, Crown of Thorns, which I believe is on this record. It's got to be, yes. So Crown of Thorns, yes. This has got Stargazer. This is Shangri-La, Stardog Champion, Holy Roller. So Mother Love Bone is one of those bands that kind of kicked it off in Seattle. Soundgarden was already up and running. Nirvana wasn't even a thing yet, more or less. You know, they just started going on Bleach. But Mother Love Bone was one of those bands that were poised for greatness. If you look up their story and look up the tragic death of Andy Wood, you'll understand that so much of what came afterwards in the early 90s started here. Obviously, it was the birth of Pearl Jam when Andy Wood died, because Jeff and Stone were then without a band, and that's when they started down the path of Pearl Jam, right? So there's a lot of reasons why this album is special to me. I love the music. I was lucky enough to see some of this performed by Temple of the Dog when they reunited a number of years ago. They played a bunch of songs from Mother Love Bone as a tribute to Andy, so that was really cool to hear Chris Cornell sing those songs. But in general, I think this is pretty undiscovered. It's never been reissued. There are unofficial copies you can find, but the original pressings are pretty hard to come by. This is one that I hold near and dear just because of what it means to that whole alternative scene in the early 90s. And I think Andy would be proud that, you know, people are still talking about this record and still have such an appreciation for this record. So that's Mother Love Bone from 1990, Apple. Next on the list, Porno for Pyro's self-titled record. This came out in 93. The big hit off this album, or I should say the only hit off this album, was Pets. But there's a number of incredible songs on this record. If I look at how it's running around backwards, other than Pets, I love the kickoff with Sadness and the title track, Cursed Female, Black Girlfriend. Just a great album. This one is special to me because when Jane's Addiction dissipated, after they had seen such success, that I was like, oh man, what's going to happen to these guys? Where's Perry Farrell going to go next? And so it was refreshing to see Perry Farrell re-enter the scene in 1993 with such a strong album. Pets was huge on radio and on MTV, rightfully so. It's just a great song. But I think the rest of the album holds up. That song, honestly, is not very indicative of the album and the band. They put out a lot more, you know, kind of more heavy, aggressive, guitar-driven stuff versus Pets, which is a very light sound. But so to me, this represents a new period for Perry Farrell. He was knee-deep in Lollapalooza at that point, which was obviously amazing. But the fact that he reemerged with such a great band, with such a great debut album. They only put out 2 records, but this is the first one, and I think a really special album for that time. That, again, I think holds up really well and has aged really well. So that's Porno for Pyro, self-titled. Next on the list, a very different record out of this bunch, and a different record for the early 90s, I think. This is Oktong Baby by U2. Came out in 1991. The band, there's a lot of story behind this record, but the band was at a crisis in regards to identity. They had just gone through a massively popular period in the mid to late 80s with the Joshua Tree and Rattle and Hum, where they were arguably the most popular mainstream rock band or guitar-based band of the day. And then they decided, you know what, let's go completely reinvent ourselves and come up with an entirely new sound. You can imagine the pressure that comes with from not only themselves, self-imposed, but everyone that worked with the band and the record label, and then obviously the fans. When an artist is going to branch out and do something completely different out of left field than what their fans are used to, you're going to get a ton of backlash. So, and they did, 91, when this hit, at the peak of when Nevermind and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains, and all of that entirely heavy alternative music was really starting to grab hold of the mainstream audience. Oktong Baby was there. It had huge hits on it, songs like One and Mysterious Ways. I mean, massively huge hits still. But I think the album tracks on this are the ones that really stand out the most. When you look at The Fly, when you look at Ultraviolet, Light My Way, Acrobat, Until the End of the World, such great songs, so impactful. I did not appreciate this album as much as I should have when it came out. Again, there was so much great music coming out during that period that it was hard to absorb it all. And so for me, this is one I got into years later. Of course, I knew the album and I knew the singles from the album because it was impossible to avoid because they were huge. But as far as really grasping the importance of it and the the longevity of it, it took me years to really discover U2 as a band, and specifically this album. And so this stands out to me as absolutely one of the high points of their career from a creativity perspective and from a songwriting perspective. I think it all came together. The production on this album with Daniel Lanois is just phenomenal. And I think it's a really unique period in time, and they followed it up with another couple of great albums in my opinion, but this is again the pinnacle. Right in the middle of U2's career, I think they made a right turn, and they ended up going in the right direction because it was a genius record from a creativity standpoint. So that's Oktong Baby. I could talk about that for another hour, but I won't. All right, so also out in 91, this is Pearl Jam 10. Now, obviously not the normal version. This is a unique pressing. This was a promotional pressing that was only released in Europe in 91. The actual pressing of Pearl Jam 10 with the normal cover and the normal vinyl didn't come out till a couple of years later. They did not, at least not in the US, not anywhere in the world, did they press 10 on with the traditional cover until I believe Versus came out. So it took them a while. But this version, which is commonly referred to as the basketball version of 10, is really, really cool and unique. It's actually in a slipcase to where you can see it's printed on clear packaging, and then the disc itself, which I will show, is obviously a picture disc on one side, and then you've got the track listing with the Pearl Jam Stickman logo on the other side. So just a really cool collectible. It actually sounds pretty good. It obviously is not going to sound as good as a traditional pressing, early pressing of 10, because it's the picture disc pressing that you know, is a little bit of a different process in regards to how they press picture discs, and the audio is usually not up to speed. But I love this record. This is not one I got back in the 90s. I've acquired in recent years just as such a cool collectible. I don't think I have to state how important this record was, but I will. It was groundbreaking. Obviously, Nirvana's Nevermind broke through first, and that really opened the floodgates. There's nothing else. You know, nothing follows after Nevermind without having that impact. But for Pearl Jam, a band that, again, having members from Mother Love Bone, they had several years of momentum already building, and so it was just, again, a perfect time and place in 91 for 10 to come out. They worked really hard for the first, I think, 12 to 18 months, pushing the album, touring the album. They did a tour supporting Alice in Chains and clubs, and it took a while for it to break, but then, like I said, once Nevermind broke, it really opened the floodgates. And obviously the band is still together today, have put out have an amazing discography. But it all started here, and to me this basketball version is just super cool and special, so had to include that one. All right, staying in the earliest part of the 90s, 94. This is an interesting record. If you don't know the cover, that's because it's a little different than the CD version. This is Pisces Iscariot by Smashing Pumpkins. It came out in 1994. It is what I like to call one of those filler albums, meaning you had Smashing Pumpkins release Gish as their first record, and then they blew up with Siamese Dream in 92, 93. And that's when the label said, we need something else immediately. What else do you have? Well, luckily, Billy Corgan writes a whole ton of songs. So that's where Pisces Iscariot came from. These are outtakes or B-sides or leftover tracks from those first couple albums. But don't let that fool you. There's some incredible tracks on this record. The only single I remember from this record was the Fleetwood Mac cover of Landslide, which is incredible. This is an early pressing that's on kind of a translucent yellow gold vinyl, which I really, really love. But this record, not only featuring Landslide, it's got Frail and Bedazzled, which is one of my favorite heavy Smashing Pumpkins songs, just an incredible, incredible sound. Pissant, Blew Away, Obscured, some incredible songs on this album. Dolly Vita, Girl Named Sandos, Blue. I'm basically naming every song because that's how good it is. Just one of those kind of undiscovered gems. Again, it doesn't have any of the big Smashing Pumpkins hits, which mainly came off of Siamese Dream and obviously off of Melancholy, which was released a couple years after this. But for that middle period when Smashing Pumpkins was massive and fans like myself were clamoring for anything that they would release, that's when this landed, and it really did fill a void for those couple years because you had played you had played Sonny's Dream and Gish to death at that point, and then this landed, and it was like a new, fresh record, regardless if they were, you know, B-sides or outtakes or whatever that really hit. So I will always remember this record as that kind of period where it's like Smashing Pumpkins was top of mind and huge. I saw them in Lollapalooza '94, and this album had just landed. So it was again a time and place for me that puts this one on the favorites list. So I love Pisces Iscariot. All right, moving ahead just a couple years to 1996. Alice in Chains' self-titled record, also commonly referred to as Tripod. This one is a pretty hard record to acquire. Oh, as is Pisces Iscariot. Pisces Iscariot at least has some reissues in recent years, so you can pick that one up. The originals are tough with all of these, goes without saying. But Alice in Chains' self-titled has never had a repress, so there are unofficial copies that you can hunt down on colored vinyl. This is an original press that I acquired back in the late 90s or early 2000s. It's an important record. It's the last record with Lane Staley from Alice in Chains before he passed away several years after this. It is often overlooked because the band had such big hits with Facelift and with Dirt, and then obviously you have the Unplugged record, which is phenomenal, not to mention Jar Flies and Sap. So there's a ton of material that I think when most people think of Alice in Chains, they gravitate towards those early middle records. But this being the last record that they put out for the initial period of the band with Lane Staley, obviously, just really, really great songs, a really heavy record. If I go through the track list, the singles off this record were Grind, and Heaven Beside You. That was kind of the biggest radio song. But if you go into the album tracks, which would be, again, was also a single, but if you go into Sludge Factory, you go into Goddamn, I love the song Frogs, and then the closing track Over Now, which they actually played as a key track on the Unplugged set as well, was really great. So I just love this album, and again, I think part of it is because it is a little undiscovered to most fans who would know Dirt or would know Unplugged, but they don't necessarily know the self-titled record. So definitely check this record out. It's hard to come by, again, as an original pressing, and it's never been reissued, but my gut says Alice in Chains is probably going to reissue this one at some point soon. It would make sense given the fact that they've gone back and done the same with Facelift, and they've gone and done the same thing with Sap. So I'm hoping this one is next. I know a lot of fans probably are as well. So that is Alice in Chains' self-titled from '96. Moving right along, we've got a couple more. This is another special one to me. This is Amorica by the Black Crowes. Came out in '94, blew me away. I was already a huge fan. They had massive success with their first record, Shake Your Moneymaker. Then they followed it up with Southern Harmony, which at the time was a huge album for me personally. In fact, it was one of the first CDs I ever bought, not records. And then Amorica comes in '94, and I think it just sets the bar and really high for the band. And it shows you that, oh, this isn't just straight down the middle kind of Rolling Stones, Lynyrd Skynyrd, Southern rock type of band. These guys have their own thing going on, right? There's an element of psychedelic influence here that I think is pretty prominent. Obviously, the cover is quite controversial and was covered up in a lot of stores. But for me, this is a special album because of the songs Wiser Time, because of the songs Descending and Cursed Diamond. Just phenomenal. The other reason this is an important album for me, specifically this actual copy here, is that I actually got to meet the band many years after, and I got this copy actually signed on the record itself. I thought it would be really cool to get this signed, so I got all the band members to sign this one. I believe this was in around 2015 I got it signed, even though I'd had the album for 20 years before that. I thought it was cool to get it signed on the actual white vinyl. Chris Robinson thought that was cool too. I remember walking up to him it was like a meet and greet after or before a show, and as soon as he saw that I had this record, he immediately said, "Is that the white one?" And I said, "Yep." And I pulled it out, and he started to kind of go to sign the cover, and I said, "What would you think about signing the actual record?" And he was like, "It's up to you, man." And so I had the whole band sign the record. I haven't framed it because it's not exactly the most frameable artwork when you've got a family and kids in the house, but it's still something I cherish. I do own another copy as my play copy of this exact version. But this one is obviously special because of the autographs and getting to meet the band. And this was the one that really just clinched it for me that Black Crowes was going to be a band I listened to for the rest of my life, and still to this day they are. Again, I love the first two records, but this is the one that really sealed the deal for me. So you can still get Amorica on vinyl. You can't get the white vinyl. Or, I mean, not new, obviously. You can chase it down. They're not incredibly expensive. But the normal reissue of the black vinyl, I highly recommend. Sounds great. I've got a copy of that one too. So love Amorica. All right, I've got two more, and these are probably two of the more obscure ones. Honestly, I kind of saved the most obscure ones for the last, for the end of the list. This is Ball Hog or Tugboat by the great Mike Watt. This is a cool album with a lot of history and a lot of story behind it. I loved this album when it came out. And I wasn't even really familiar with Mike Watt at the time. Former Minutemen and Firehose frontman, bassist, really iconic punk icon. I've come to appreciate a lot of his work, but this one in particular, again, it comes out in '94 at the peak of alternative music taking over the mainstream. And the reason why this album was so impactful, and honestly the reason why it fell on my radar, was because of who is on this album. So Firehouse, Watt's previous band, had just broken up, so he didn't have a band. So what did he do? He went out and he just got an all-star cast, including Dave Grohl and Eddie Vedder and Henry Rollins and Flea and Frank Black. I'm just reading names. They've got all the names listed on this back. Mark Lanigan, Thurston Moore, Stephen Perkins, Chris Novoselic. So again, I'm just pulling off random ones. There's literally 30 or 40 guest stars on this album. It's got the Kirkwood brothers from the Meat Puppets. And so that's what makes this album just incredibly cool, is it's got this cross-section of all these incredible musicians from song to song. And only someone like Mike Watt, with that amount of credibility, could get all these guys on one record. This is an original pressing from '94, I believe, released an early pressing, and it's on a translucent blue, which I just love. Key tracks, I think, that come to mind, at least that stood out initially and still do, are Against the 70s. That was the one that Vedder sang on, so that was big for me. I also love Big Train, Piss Bottle Man, E-Ticket Ride. I'm just smiling, laughing at some of these. Maggot Brain. So just a great package, a great kind of, I love the gatefold with him and his bass, chewing on the bass strings. This one's not an easy one to find if you want to check it out. I'm pretty sure you could probably stream it, but the vinyl's a little hard to come by. They have done one or two reissues of it, you know, since '94, so you can track those down as well. This is the only one on colored vinyl, I believe. But again, just a cool record that I really appreciate. It was really unique for the time, not one of those big selling titles or anything. Obviously, Mike Watt is more or less unknown to the mainstream, but as far as people who are in the know of the punk scene, the kind of indie garage scene, he obviously comes with a lot of clout, and he got an incredible group of musicians to back him on this, and there's some great songs to go along with it. The tour for this record, there's also a lot of story behind that, because he actually he got Foo Fighters on their very first tour. So when Dave Grohl had just formed Foo Fighters opened for Mike Watt on this tour, and Grohl played drums for Mike Watt, pulling double duty, and then Eddie Vedder came out and played guitar. I believe Flea was on bass too. I could be wrong there, but it didn't last very long because so many people started showing up during the shows just to see, you know, Eddie Vedder and Dave Grohl, that it didn't work out, and they eventually ended up bailing off the tour, I believe is the story, but short-lived, you know, band tour that they did to support that record. So I love that record. Last but not least, all of these hold a lot of personal importance for me, obviously, but none more than this. This is I'm Elastic Firecracker by Tripping Daisy. These guys are based in my hometown of Dallas. They are one of the reasons why I'm such a music fanatic, why I ever picked up a guitar, and why I still am a huge proponent of the Dallas-Fort Worth music scene to this day. I was at the CD release party for this record. I've got an autographed copy that's on my wall that I'm not going to pull down, but I actually won that record that's signed at the CD release party, where the band didn't even play. It was a sold out event at a club just to come hear the record for the first time. So that was my entrance to this record. The only quasi radio hit off this was a song called I Got a Girl. You may remember if you're not familiar with this band. So again, it came out in '95. The band had put out an independent record here locally in Dallas called Bill that was really popular locally and got re-released, and then this was the first real major release that they had recorded for Island Records, and it did really well for them. It didn't sustain them, unfortunately, for many more years after this. They put out several other great records, but as far as being in the mainstream. So again, this is just an important one for me because it was in a lot of ways solidified the Dallas scene as being legitimate, along with Rubberneck by the Toadies, another album that came out of Dallas right around the same time. So that album and this album were just all over radio, especially locally, but even nationally and internationally, got a lot of play. So it was amazing to be in Dallas, in the Dallas area at this time, knowing that we didn't have what was going on in Seattle. Obviously, it wasn't to that scope as far as the attention it was getting, but there were bands who were coming out of Dallas who were every bit as good, who were writing songs and getting tours and just really, really, really taking the alternative rock world by storm. And so it was amazing that some of those were actually from our area. I do have several copies of this. Here's another copy that I picked up recently that's signed by a couple of the band members. My framed one is signed by all the band members, even Wes Bergeron, who passed away a few years after this one, unfortunately. But so that's Tripping Daisy, I Am an Elastic Firecracker. If you're not familiar with this record, check it out. It's very much, I would describe it as influenced by the likes of Jane's Addiction, the likes of Flaming Lips. There's definitely some psychedelic components to it, but it's a hard-hitting rock record. Great melodies, great songs. Can't recommend it enough. So that's why I put that one last, because of all of these records, that probably holds more importance than any. So that's my list of my favorite original 90s vinyl records. Like I said, there's another 50 or 100 behind that, but if I whittled it down, I try to stay top of mind and try not overthink these things and just choose the ones that come to my mind first, because usually what comes in your mind first, that's your gut feeling, and it's usually right. So I feel pretty good about this list as if I had to choose my favorites. These would all be up there, if not in the top 10, very, very close. So thanks for watching another episode of Talking About Records. I really appreciate you tuning in. We will see you next time and talk about records more right here on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and wherever else you hopefully follow me. Thanks a lot.